The air in the Washington D.C. conference hall crackled with hostility as the annual National Policy Forum kicked off. Rows of polished wooden chairs held a restless crowd, their murmurs rising like a storm about to break. On the elevated stage, two figures stood at podiums, glaring at each other under harsh spotlights. Kash Patel, a former government advisor with a reputation for bulldozing opponents, adjusted his tie with a smirk. Opposite him, Representative Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp tongue and unyielding principles, gripped her notes, her eyes blazing. The topic was government transparency, but everyone knew this was personal. Years ago, Patel had led a secretive investigation that nearly derailed Crockett's early political career, and she had never forgiven him. Now, with the nation watching, she was ready to settle the score. Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her voice steady but venomous. She accused Patel of hiding critical documents during his time in office, ones that could have exposed corruption, but instead protected his allies. The crowd gasped as she waved a folder, claiming it held proof of his misdeeds. Patel's face twisted in fury, his knuckles whitening on the podium. He shot back, calling her a liar chasing headlines, her so-called evidence nothing but fabricated gossip. His words dripped with scorn, and he mocked her past, saying she was too inexperienced to understand real politics. The insult landed like a slap, and Jasmine's jaw tightened, her fingers trembling with rage. The moderator, a nervous man in a grey suit, tried to steer the debate, but his voice was drowned out by the escalating war of words. Tension gripped the audience, their faces a mix of shock and anticipation. An elderly man in the front row clutched his program, whispering to his wife that this was no ordinary debate. Jasmine, undeterred, opened her folder and read aloud from a memo, alleging Patel had buried a report that could have saved millions, earned taxpayer money. Her voice rose, each word a dagger aimed at his reputation. Patel interrupted, slamming his fist on the podium, shouting that she was dragging his name through the mud with baseless attacks. He called her desperate, a politician clinging to relevance by smearing honest men. The crowd stirred, some booing, others cheering, as the room split into factions. Security guards at the doors exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the debate could spiral out of control. Sweat beaded on Patel's forehead as he leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. He accused Jasmine of leaking classified information to the press years ago, a move he claimed endangered lives. The accusation was a bombshell, and the hall fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Jasmine's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, firing back that Patel was the one who had twisted facts to cover his tracks. She called him a coward who hid behind power, and the crowd erupted, some shouting insults at Patel, others at her. The moderator pleaded for calm, but neither debater listened, their voices clashing like thunder. Jasmine's hand shook as she pointed at Patel, vowing to expose every secret he thought he'd buried. The clock on the wall ticked toward the debate's halfway mark, but no one noticed. Patel's composure was cracking, his usual smugness replaced by raw anger. He stepped from behind his podium, ignoring the moderator's protests, and jabbed a finger toward Jasmine. He demanded she retract her lies or face consequences, his voice shaking with rage. Jasmine stood her ground, her stare icy, and told him she wasn't scared of his threats. She promised the audience she'd reveal more, something so damning it would end his career. The crowd roared, some chanting her name, others jeering, as the hall became a powder keg. Patel's face flushed red, his eyes wild, as he realized Jasmine was holding a card he hadn't anticipated, one that could unravel. Everything he'd built. Chaos swirled in the conference hall as the crowd's roars echoed off the high ceilings. Kash Patel stood inches from his podium, his finger still pointed at Jasmine Crockett, his chest heaving with barely controlled rage. The moderator's pleas for order were swallowed by the noise, and security guards edged closer to the stage, their radios crackling. Jasmine, her posture rigid, clutched her folder like a shield, her eyes locked on Patel's. She had just promised to reveal a secret that could destroy him, and the weight of her words hung heavy, daring him to strike back. The audience leaned forward, their anticipation electric, sensing a breaking point was near. Patel's voice boomed, cutting through the din. He called Jasmine's bluff, sneering that her so-called proof was a fantasy, a desperate attempt to smear a patriot. His words were sharp, meant to wound, as he mocked her as a small-time politician out of her depth. He turned to the crowd, arms spread, asking if they'd trust a woman who built her career on lies. The jab sparked a wave of jeers from his supporters, their voices clashing with cheers from Jasmine's allies. Her lips curled into a grim smile, and she stepped forward, her heels clicking on the stage. She told Patel he was the one running scared, hiding behind insults because he knew the truth was coming. Her defiance lit a fire in the room, and the crowd's noise surged, a mix of anger and excitement. A woman in the back row gripped her husband's arm, her eyes wide with disbelief. The debate had become a gladiator match, each word a swing of the sword. Jasmine opened her folder again, her hands steady now, and pulled out a single sheet. She held it up, her voice clear and cutting, announcing it was a signed letter from a former colleague of Patel's. The letter, she claimed, detailed how Patel had pressured staff to shred documents that exposed illegal deals. The accusation hit like a thunderclap, and Patel's face drained of color. He lunged toward her, shouting that she was forging evidence, his voice hoarse with fury. The moderator rushed between them, arms outstretched, but Patel shoved past, demanding to see the letter. Jasmine held it out of reach, taunting him to admit his guilt first. The hall felt like it was holding its breath, every eye on the stage. Patel's supporters yelled that Jasmine was a fraud, while others screamed for him to back off. A man in a suit near the stage stood, shaking his fist, his face red with anger. Jasmine didn't flinch, her voice rising as she read from the letter, quoting a line about Patel's orders to destroy evidence. Each word was a nail in his coffin, and the crowd's reaction grew wilder, some chanting for justice, others hurling insults. Patel grabbed the microphone, his voice shaking as he accused Jasmine of bribing witnesses to frame him. He called her a disgrace, a danger to the country, his words venomous but unsteady, betraying a crack in his armor. Jasmine shot back, saying his panic proved his guilt, and the audience erupted again, the noise deafening. Patel's eyes darted to the crowd, then back to Jasmine, his confidence unraveling. He took a step back, his hands clenched, as if weighing his next move. Jasmine seized the moment, turning to the audience and vowing to release the full letter to the press after the debate. She called Patel a liar who'd betrayed public trust, her voice fierce and unwavering. The crowd's cheers drowned out his attempt to respond, and for the first time he looked cornered, his usual swagger gone. The moderator, now sweating, announced a brief pause, but no one moved, riveted by the drama. Jasmine folded the letter, tucking it into her folder, and gave Patel a look of pure defiance. He glared back, his jaw tight, knowing the fight was far from over, but sensing the tide turning against him. The conference hall pulsed with raw energy, the crowd's shouts bouncing off the walls like a gathering storm. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her folder now closed, but the letter she'd revealed still loomed over the stage like a guillotine. Kash Patel, his face a mask of fury, gripped his microphone, his voice hoarse from shouting. The moderator's call for a pause hung ignored, as neither debater showed any sign of backing down. Security guards hovered at the stage's edge, their hands on their radios, ready for the moment the chaos spilled over. The audience, a sea of flushed faces, seemed to feed off the tension, their loyalty split between the two figures locked in a verbal cage match. Patel took a slow breath, his eyes narrowing as he tried to reclaim control. He accused Jasmine of staging a circus, claiming her letter was a cheap trick to distract from her own failures. His tone was biting, each word laced with contempt as he called her a manipulator who'd do anything for power. The crowd stirred, some nodding in agreement, others heckling him to sit down. Jasmine didn't wait for him to finish. She cut in, her voice like a whip, saying his attacks were the desperate flailing of a guilty man. She pointed to the crowd, declaring they deserved the truth, not his excuses. Her words ignited a wave of cheers, and Patel's jaw clenched, his composure fraying further under her relentless pressure. An older woman in the third row whispered to her friend, her hands trembling with excitement. The debate felt like a courtroom showdown, each accusation a step closer to a verdict. Jasmine shifted her stance, her eyes never leaving Patel, and announced she had more evidence, not just the letter. She hinted at recorded conversations, ones that allegedly caught Patel admitting to covering up corruption. The revelation sent a jolt through the room, and Patel's eyes widened, his voice cracking as he shouted that she was inventing stories. He lunged toward the moderator, demanding the debate be stopped, calling it a witch hunt. The moderator, flustered, stammered that the rules allowed both sides to speak, but Patel ignored him, turning back to Jasmine with a snarl, warning her to watch her back. The audience's reaction was a roar, some chanting Jasmine's name, others yelling for Patel to prove his innocence. A man near the aisle stood, his voice booming as he called Patel a crook, sparking a fresh wave of shouts. Jasmine seized the moment, her voice rising above the chaos. She described a specific incident years ago when Patel allegedly pressured a junior staffer to falsify records. Her details were vivid, her tone unrelenting as she painted him as a bully who'd intimidated anyone in his way. Patel interrupted, his face red, accusing her of slander and vowing to sue her into oblivion. His threat only fueled the crowd's frenzy, and Jasmine smirked, telling him to bring it on, her confidence unshaken. Patel's hands shook as he gripped the podium, his usual polish gone. He tried to pivot, addressing the audience directly, claiming he'd spent his career protecting the country while Jasmine chased fame. But his words fell flat, drowned by boos and scattered applause. Jasmine didn't let up, her voice steady. As she promised to make every document public, no matter the cost. She called him a traitor to the public's trust, and the crowd erupted, the noise shaking the hall. Patel's eyes darted to the exits, then back to her, his rage now mixed with something new, fear. Jasmine stood firm, her gaze piercing as the moderator struggled to regain control, announcing the final segment. The hall braced for what was coming, knowing neither would yield, and the battle was about to reach its peak. The Washington D.C. conference hall felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with the crowd's fevered anticipation. Kash Patel stood at his podium, his face a storm of rage and desperation, his earlier swagger replaced by a man fighting to save his name. Jasmine Crockett, unyielding, stared him down, her posture radiating defiance as she prepared to deliver her final blows. The moderator, now a sweating bystander, clutched his notes, his attempts to steer the debate long abandoned. The audience, a restless tide of voices, leaned forward, their cheers and jeers fueling the clash on stage. Security guards flanked the aisles, their eyes scanning for trouble as the tension threatened to ignite. Jasmine raised her voice, cutting through the noise like a blade. She accused Patel of orchestrating a scheme to silence whistleblowers, claiming her sources had proof he'd threatened careers to keep his secrets buried. Her words were precise, each one landing with the force of a hammer as she described a culture of fear under his watch. Patel's eyes flashed with fury, and he shouted over her, calling her a fraud who'd concocted a fantasy to ruin him. His voice cracked, betraying his panic, as he accused her of working with his enemies to stage this ambush. The crowd split, some roaring in support of Jasmine's courage, others yelling that Patel was being framed. The chaos grew louder, a living thing feeding on their hatred. A retired teacher in the front row clutched her purse, her heart racing as the debate turned into a public trial. Jasmine didn't pause, her voice steady as she pulled another document from her folder. She held it aloft, announcing it was an email from Patel himself, one that allegedly instructed an aide to destroy evidence before an audit. The revelation sent shockwaves through the hall, and Patel lunged forward, his face twisted in rage, demanding she hand it over. The moderator stepped in, his voice trembling, but Patel pushed him aside, shouting that Jasmine was forging lies to destroy an honest man. Jasmine stood her ground, her eyes cold, and told him his time was up, her words sharp enough to cut glass. The crowd erupted, some chanting for truth, others screaming at her to stop. Patel's hands trembled as he gripped the microphone, his voice now a raw growl. He turned to the audience, pleading his case, claiming he'd been targeted by a system that Jasmine served. His words were desperate, his usual polish shattered as he called her a snake who'd betrayed the country for personal gain. The accusation sparked a fresh wave of shouts, and a woman in the balcony stood, yelling that Patel should be locked up. Jasmine seized the moment, her voice rising with righteous anger. She vowed to deliver every piece of evidence to the authorities, no matter who tried to stop her. She called Patel a coward who'd built his career on lies, and the crowd's roar shook the rafters. Their energy a tidal wave crashing over the stage. The hall seemed to tighten around the two figures, every eye locked on their war. Patel's face was ashen, his breath shallow as he realized the tide had turned. He tried one last attack, accusing Jasmine of violating national security with her reckless leaks. But his voice faltered, and the crowd's boos drowned him out, their faith in him crumbling. Jasmine's eyes blazed with triumph, her voice unwavering as she addressed the audience, promising justice for every wrong Patel had committed. The moderator, barely audible, signaled the debate's end, but the crowd was too consumed, their cheers for Jasmine deafening. Patel stood frozen, his world unraveling as Jasmine folded her documents, her gaze never leaving him, ready to carry the fight beyond the stage. The conference hall vibrated with the crowd's relentless energy, their voices a thunderous chorus that seemed to shake the very walls. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of the stage, her folder now tucked under her arm, her face alight with unyielding resolve. Kash Patel, his shoulders slumped, gripped his podium as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, now darted nervously, reflecting a man staring down his own defeat. The moderator, exhausted and ignored, stepped back, surrendering the stage to the final moments of this brutal showdown. The audience, their faces flushed with passion, hung on every word, sensing the end of a battle that had left no one unscathed. Jasmine turned to the crowd, her voice clear and commanding, cutting through the chaos. She declared that Patel's reign of secrecy was over, promising to deliver her evidence to every journalist and lawmaker who would listen. Her words were a vow, each one ringing with the weight of justice as she called for accountability from those who hid behind power. The crowd roared in approval, their cheers a tidal wave of support, and Patel's face twisted in despair. He tried to interrupt, his voice weak, accusing her of grandstanding to mask her own corruption. But his words were hollow, swallowed by the audience's boos, their trust in him shattered beyond repair. Jasmine's lips curled into a fierce smile, and she told him his lies had run out of room to hide. An elderly man in the second row stood, clapping furiously, his eyes shining with pride. The hall felt like a courtroom delivering its verdict, the air charged with the triumph of truth. Jasmine stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the audience, and shared a story of a whistleblower who'd risked everything to expose Patel's schemes. Her voice softened, but its strength never wavered, as she honored those who'd been silenced by his intimidation. The crowd fell silent, moved by her words, their anger giving way to admiration. Patel, desperate, shouted that she was spinning, tales to win sympathy, but his voice was a faint echo, ignored by a room that had already judged him. The moderator raised a hand, signaling the debate's official close, but the crowd's focus remained on Jasmine, their champion. Patel's hands fell to his sides, his fight drained, as he realized no defense could save him now. He muttered, under his breath, calling Jasmine a traitor. But the words lacked venom, a final gasp from a broken man. Jasmine didn't flinch, her voice rising one last time to address the audience. She thanked them for standing with her, for believing in the truth, and promised that this was only the beginning of holding the powerful accountable. Her words sparked a standing ovation, the crowd's applause shaking the hall, a symphony of victory. A woman in the back wiped tears from her eyes, whispering to her neighbor that justice had finally won. Patel turned away, his head bowed, unable to face the sea of faces now united against him. The stage lights dimmed, but the energy lingered, a testament to the battle that had unfolded. Jasmine walked off the stage, her head high, greeted by supporters who shook her hand and thanked her for her courage. The crowd began to disperse, their voices buzzing with excitement, already recounting the debate's fiercest moments. Patel lingered a moment longer, alone under the fading spotlight, his reputation in ruins. The hall emptied, but the echoes of Jasmine's triumph remained, a story of truth prevailing that would spread far beyond those walls. She had exposed Patel's dark history, faced his rage, and emerged victorious, her resolve a beacon for all who believed in justice.